tick, tick, tick. Somewhere in the dark, unseen gears turn. Their rhythm is steady, ancient, and oddly alive. The sound blends with the crackle of a candle's flame and the soft rustle of parchment, an orchestra of forgotten hands still working in the silence of time. We are told that the medieval world was a dim age of superstition, a pause between ancient brilliance and modern reason. But what if that story is incomplete? What if, behind the curtain of faith and fear, machines once stirred that defied everything we think we know about progress? Imagine stone corridors lined with manuscripts inked in meticulous strokes, their margins whispering secrets in the form of cogs, pulleys, and hidden mechanisms. To most eyes, they were symbols, allegories of divine order. To others, they were blueprints. Between lines of scripture and geometry, someone had begun to dream in metal and motion. The medieval world we inherited in textbooks feels still, frozen in amber. Knights riding into battle, monks illuminating texts, cathedrals scraping heaven. Yet, within that stillness, fragments flicker: a brass bird that beat its wings without breath, a clock so precise it counted the pulse of the stars, surgical instruments so finely carved they could have been made with tools centuries ahead of their time. These are not fantasies. They are recorded, drawn, and sometimes even found. Each fragment is a window into a civilization that may have climbed higher than we dare to imagine, only to fall suddenly, completely, and deliberately forgotten. We like to think of history as a ladder, one invention building neatly upon another, each century wiser than the last. But what if it isn't a ladder at all? What if it's a wheel turning, rising and falling, rediscovering what it once knew? Every revolution brings light, and every collapse plunges it back into darkness. The pattern repeats so seamlessly that the gaps no longer look like gaps. They look like continuity. The mind drifts to the scholars who once tended hidden workshops behind monastery walls. They built water clocks that imitated breathing, toys that played instruments, celestial globes that tracked the dance of planets. These were not superstitious artisans fumbling toward enlightenment. They were engineers of elegance, scientists of imagination. Yet their legacy lies scattered, burned, buried, rewritten. Perhaps progress is not the story of invention, but of survival. For every device that reached us, how many were lost in wars, inquisitions, or floods of indifference? The ticking we hear might not be progress marching forward, but the echo of what was once perfectly understood and then silenced. As the candle burns lower, the page beneath it begins to curl. The ink fades where heat touches it, like knowledge erasing itself. Somewhere beyond that dim chamber, cathedrals rise, kings fall, and time folds itself into neat, misleading chapters. Yet beneath the ash of centuries, the machines still wait etched in bronze, drawn in hidden margins, humming softly in the collective memory of humankind. And so, we are left with a question that turns like those ancient gears. How much of our past have we truly lost, and how much have we merely chosen to forget? If the dark ages were never truly dark, then perhaps the only thing dimmed was our willingness to remember. The candle extinguishes, leaving only the sound, the quiet, steady rhythm of history's hidden mechanism still ticking, somewhere beneath our feet, guiding us toward its rediscovery. History, we are told, is a story, a single, elegant thread weaving through time. But what if that thread has been spliced, edited, and rewoven by those who held the pen? The victors of each age do not merely record events, they sculpt memory. What remains for us is not the full truth, but the version most convenient to remember. The rest innovations, rival philosophies, forbidden knowledge, crumbles quietly in the margins. Imagine the silence after a library burns, the soundless weight of words turning to ash. Constantinople's libraries, the vast storehouses of the Abbasid scholars, the mechanical treatises of the Andalusian courts, all gone. What we call the Middle Ages may not have been an absence of discovery, but an aftermath of destruction. Each lost manuscript was not just a story, it was a mind erased. There are whispers of archives dismantled, of texts labeled heretical and sealed away beneath cathedral vaults. The Church, fearful of ideas that could rival divine creation, often walked a delicate balance between preservation and suppression. Scholars were encouraged to think, but only within the bounds of doctrine. The rest? Rewritten, forbidden, or corrected. What we now study as linear evolution might have been a filtered continuum, cleaned of contradiction. Consider how empire after empire rewrote its predecessors. When the Mongols conquered Baghdad, they drowned centuries of knowledge in the Tigris. When religious reformations swept across Europe, monastic libraries were purged, cleansed of dangerous speculation. Even the mechanical genius of Islamic engineers, men who mapped the stars, harnessed hydraulics, and described mechanical automata centuries ahead of their time, was dismissed as superstition by later chroniclers. Their devices, intricate and elegant, vanished into legend. Yet the strangest erasures are not those done by conquest, but by convenience. Sometimes, knowledge is simply too disruptive. A design too advanced, a theory too bold, it unsettles the order of things. And so, it is quietly omitted from new editions, excluded from future lessons, allowed to fade until the absence feels natural. We do not question what is no longer there. We accept the smooth surface of official history as truth, never seeing the scars beneath it. The deeper one looks, the more deliberate it feels. The machines that should not have existed, the inventions credited centuries late, the patterns of rediscovery that are too precise to be coincidence. We are told that genius blooms from nothing, that progress follows a steady upward climb. But the evidence, fragmented, inconsistent, haunting, tells another story, a story of interruption. Somewhere between faith and fear, between empire and ambition, a decision was made not to remember. It is there, in the spaces between texts, that the pulse of forgotten technology beats faintly, waiting for eyes willing to see it. A fragment of bronze, a sketch on parchment, a mistranslated passage hinting at a truth that refuses to die. And perhaps this is what makes the study of history so deceptive. We think we are learning about the past, but often we are only discovering what someone wanted preserved. Each century hides its secrets in plain sight, buried under rewritten dates, redrawn maps, renamed inventors. It is not the darkness that blinds us, but the comfort of believing the light we have is enough. The quiet ticking returns a phantom rhythm threading through the centuries, undiminished by time or censorship. It reminds us that progress is not a straight path, but a battlefield between memory and power. Knowledge, after all, is never truly lost. It waits, hidden behind the stories we were told to trust. And so, as we move forward, the question deepens. If history doesn't just forget, but deletes, what purpose lay behind its selective memory? Who decided which inventions would live and which would be erased from the collective mind? The candlelight flickers once more, revealing faint diagrams beneath soot circles, levers, and annotations written by a vanished hand. The air feels heavier, as if the past itself leans closer, ready to whisper its confession. Soon, a name will emerge from that shadow. A man whose machines defied centuries, whose genius bridged worlds, and whose memory was nearly wiped clean. Out of the haze of forgotten manuscripts and erased memories, a single name begins to surface, faint at first, then sharp as metal meeting light. Al-Jazari, a man of the 12th century, born in the lands we now call Mesopotamia. His title, Chief Engineer of the Artukid Court. His work, impossible for his time. In his surviving book, The Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices, he drew what the world would not rediscover for hundreds of years. machines that could move by themselves, clocks that marked not only hours but celestial motion, water-driven mechanisms with valves that regulated flow, gears that could calculate cycles, and systems that behaved as though they possessed thought. Each page feels like a whisper from a parallel age, an echo of the future trapped inside medieval ink. Picture it. A marble basin glimmering in lamplight, carved with delicate figures. A hidden stream feeds it through unseen pipes. Then, as if by command, a fountain begins to shift. From its spouts, bronze birds sing, moving their heads, fluttering their wings. Servants and courtiers stare as if witnessing magic. But this was not sorcery, it was engineering. Within the fountain's core, a network of chambers, floats, and counterweights performed a perfect choreography of physics. Elsewhere, Al-Jazari designed a water clock shaped like an elephant. Its eyes rolled. A bird called at each passing interval. An automaton rider struck the hours with precise rhythm. These were not toys, they were marvels of mathematics, automation, and imagination combined. Every mechanism was a balance between art and science, devotion and discovery. Yet, beyond a handful of scholars, his name scarcely crosses Western tongues. It is strange, isn't it? We are taught of Leonardo da Vinci as the father of engineering brilliance centuries later. But Al-Jazari described cams, gears, and crankshafts long before. His designs included rudimentary programming, interchangeable pegs that altered the behavior of machines. In essence, he built the logic of automation before the word robot ever existed. And yet, the world forgot him. For centuries, his manuscripts slept in silence, surviving only in obscure libraries of the Middle East. When fragments were finally translated in the 19th century, the tone of scholars was disbelief. How could such sophistication exist so early? Some dismissed it as exaggeration, others as coincidence. Few considered that perhaps our timeline, so neatly constructed, might be missing entire staircases of genius. The question lingers, heavy and persistent. What other names vanished beneath the dust? What other hands built wonders erased before they could inspire? Al-Jazari's machines survived only as faint sketches, but even those are enough to rewrite what we thought we knew about medieval minds. His world was not one of ignorance. It was a laboratory disguised as an empire. As the camera of imagination drifts across his surviving pages, the viewer feels a strange pull, both admiration and loss. Because within those gears and valves lies evidence that progress once reached heights we barely comprehend, only to fall silent. Perhaps it wasn't the lack of ability that dimmed the Middle Ages, but the fear of what such ability meant. A world that could build lifelike machines might also question the boundaries of divinity, and that was dangerous. The candlelight fades again. The ink glistens, and the echo of moving water returns. We see the automata of Al-Jazari not just as mechanical marvels, but as metaphors for memory itself, intricate systems designed to move, to repeat, to endure. And yet, like their creator, they were left to rust in the silence of forgotten centuries. But now, the wheel of history turns once more. His gears begin to move again, their rhythm aligning with the ancient ticking we heard before. The past is no longer still, it stirs, awakening. Soon, we will follow that motion outward to other lands, other inventors, and the haunting realization that Al-Jazari was never alone. The sound arrives first slow, deliberate, impossibly steady. Somewhere in the mist of medieval Europe, an iron bell tolls above sleeping streets. Beneath the bell tower, gears turn in darkness, their teeth biting gently into one another. The air smells of oil and cold stone. Each movement, each tick, is a heartbeat that should not yet exist. For in the 14th century, such precision should have been impossible. Cathedrals were meant to lift souls toward heaven, not to measure the seconds of the earth. Yet high within their towers, hidden between prayer and architecture, something extraordinary began to move. Great wooden wheels, bound by iron rings, turned with the discipline of celestial bodies. Weighted ropes descended through narrow shafts, their tension guiding entire communities through the rhythm of day and night. People called these towers miracles of faith, but the true miracle was mechanical. We are told that the art of accurate timekeeping began centuries later, refined by Renaissance scientists and Enlightenment thinkers, but evidence suggests otherwise. The earliest clockmakers of medieval Europe, anonymous, undocumented, crafted mechanisms that shouldn't have existed with the metallurgy of their age. They used escapements to regulate motion, differential gears to balance weight, and counterpoised levers that echoed the logic of modern engineering. The designs are too clean, too advanced, as if borrowed from an inheritance older than the towns that housed them. Listen closely. The ticking changes with the wind, echoing against the fog-drenched walls of cities like Salisbury, Rouen, and Prague. Each tower is a monument to time, but also to mystery. How did artisans, working with crude forges and imperfect iron, build machines capable of running for centuries? Who first imagined turning the invisible flow of hours into motion, into sound, into discipline? The chronicles give us names, yet none of them invented the concept. They only perfected what already existed. Somewhere before them, before the guilds and the guildmasters, there must have been prototypes, models, or manuscripts now lost. A lineage of knowledge that survived plagues, wars, and silence, leaving behind only the hum of moving gears. When the bells struck each hour, villagers believed they were hearing the voice of God marking time. In truth, they were hearing engineering so sophisticated that even modern restorers struggle to replicate it without guesswork. The rhythm that governed prayer, work, and rest came not from heaven but from human ingenuity hidden in stone. At night, when the last torch went out, the clock kept breathing in the dark, weights descending imperceptibly, gears sliding against polished metal teeth. To the priests who maintained them, the machines were sacred instruments. To the builders, they were proof that matter could mirror divinity through precision. Between those two beliefs lay the birth of mechanical civilization. And yet, these marvels are seldom treated as revolutions. They appear in textbooks as curiosities, mechanical oddities at the fringe of faith. But imagine standing beneath one, hearing the click of an escapement so subtle that it sounds alive. It is impossible not to sense that the mind behind it knew far more than it should have. The deeper we listen, the stranger it becomes. Some restored clocks reveal patterns of gearing identical to devices described by Arab engineers centuries earlier. Machines of water and weight that predate these cathedrals by generations. Could the knowledge have traveled across crusades, through traders, scholars, or captured artisans? Or did it emerge again, spontaneously, as if memory itself found a way to rebuild? The fog thickens around the tower. A final chime fades into the distance, leaving only the whisper of machinery that refuses to die. Its rhythm feels eternal, echoing from Al-Jazari's fountains to the towers of Europe, reminding us that time is not merely counted, it is constructed. And so the question turns. Like the gears themselves. Who built these impossible clocks? And where did their understanding come from? Excellent. Continuing seamlessly in tone and narrative rhythm here is, beneath the echo of cathedral bells and the solemn gaze of saints carved in stone, another world quietly turned its gears. The true masters of time were not priests or nobles, but wandering craftsmen, metalworkers, clockmakers, and builders who spoke in whispers and symbols. They moved between cities like shadows, their tools wrapped in cloth, their knowledge carried not in books, but in memory. The guilds of the Middle Ages were more than brotherhoods of labor. They were fortresses of secrecy. Entry required oaths, tests, and sometimes blood. Within their halls, guarded by candlelight, apprentices learned to shape metal as though it were alive. Every file stroke, every calibration of a wheel was a word in a language the outside world was not allowed to hear. The machines they built were miracles, but their blueprints, those fragile lines of genius, were hidden under coded marks or carved into the beams of workshops where only initiates could read them. There were reasons for such silence. In a world ruled by faith, invention could look like blasphemy. A mechanism that mimicked divine order might be seen as a challenge to God himself. So, ingenuity wore a mask. The same clockmaker who built an escapement in one town might reappear in another, posing as a sculptor, a mason, or a blacksmith. To the untrained eye, their tools were ordinary. Only when the pieces came together did the pattern reveal itself. Some guild records mention strange emblems, a star with 7 points, a hand gripping a wheel, a serpent encircling a hammer. Historians debate their meanings, but perhaps they were not symbols of mysticism at all. Perhaps they were diagrams, hints of gear ratios or assembly sequences encoded in plain sight. Innovation traveled along these hidden lines, disguised as faith or folklore. When empires rose and fell, the guilds endured, quietly moving their workshops from one stronghold to another. Their apprentices became masters, their masters became myths. Through their silence, they preserved the fragments of a science too fragile to survive open scrutiny. The rhythm of their secrecy mirrored the rhythm of the clocks they built, measured, deliberate, unstoppable. It is tempting to see them as conspirators, but perhaps they were simply guardians. They knew that discovery without protection could end in flames, as it had for countless scholars before them. So they buried their knowledge in ritual, passed it through coded songs, symbols etched on tools, and stories told only at initiation. And maybe, beneath the shadow of cathedrals and castles, they dreamed of a time when such knowledge could finally breathe in the open. Until then, the sound of progress had to remain hidden within the click of gears and the turning of wheels, motion without revelation. The bells toll again, soft and distant, like an answer from the past. Somewhere, a journeyman packs his tools at dawn, leaving one city for another, carrying the weight of secrets too heavy for parchment. His path disappears into fog, but his craft does not. Because knowledge, once set in motion, cannot truly be stopped. It simply changes hands, changes shapes, waiting for another age to recognize it. And when that age arrives, it will find that the same symbols appear far from Europe in lands where the sun rises first, where clockwork once served the stars rather than the hours. Absolutely continuing seamlessly in tone, pacing, and atmosphere, here is, the story of time does not belong to Europe alone. Long before cathedrals whispered the hours into mist, another rhythm echoed in the east, the measured breath of machines that watched the stars. In the heart of ancient China, centuries before the first Western tower clocks struck their chimes, engineers built water-driven mechanisms so complex that even today their workings seem half dream, half revelation. In Kaifeng, a city of scholars and astronomers, stood a clock tower that rose like a temple of movement. Designed by the polymath Su Song in the 11th century, it was a marvel of wheels and water, chains and precision. Its bronze armillary sphere mapped the heavens, turning in perfect rhythm with the sky. Dragons opened their jaws to release pearls that marked the passing hours. Wooden figures emerged to strike bells with unerring timing. This was not ornament. It was computation astronomy made mechanical. Every cycle of its rotation was a conversation between heaven and earth. And farther south, in India, hydraulic marvels marked the seasons and the flow of rivers. Engineers of the Chola and Delhi courts used gravity, pressure, and balance to move water across gardens and temples. They built fountains that pulsed like hearts, rotating basins that could change direction with the sun, and irrigation wheels that mirrored the logic of perpetual motion. The same mathematical precision that guided their architecture extended into motion, elegant, rhythmic, alive. If one were to trace the invisible threads between these civilizations, the pattern would be undeniable. Knowledge flowed along the veins of trade routes, carried by merchants, scholars, and craftsmen who spoke the shared language of invention. Across deserts and oceans, they exchanged fragments of brilliance, a new alloy here, a gear design there, the secret of a balanced weight that could mark time without faltering. Each culture added its own verse to the poem of machinery, and yet, how little of it survived unbroken. When dynasties fell, libraries burned, conquerors dismantled observatories, melted bronze for weapons, erased the memory of the machines they could not understand. Colonial archivists later catalogued fragments but ignored the spirit behind them, folding centuries of independent innovation into the margins of Western timelines. The result was a silence so deep that even the survivors began to believe that their ancestors had built wonders by accident, not by design. Imagine standing before the remnants of Susong's clock, its stones scattered, its bronze corroded. The gears that once turned the cosmos now lie still, but even in ruin, they hum with intention. Each tooth cut into metal was an act of understanding, a proof that humanity's dialogue with the universe has always been mechanical as much as spiritual. The same curiosity that built Europe's hidden clocks had already flourished here, under different skies. So why did only one version of the story endure? Why, when textbooks speak of the dawn of engineering, do so few mention the towers that turned before the Renaissance, or the fountains that sang before Florence ever dreamed of invention? The answer may lie not in superiority, but in survival. Power decides what history remembers. The mist thickens again, but the echo remains, water dripping through chambers, weights descending in perfect rhythm, the heartbeat of civilization speaking the same language through different forms. Time itself feels older, less linear, as if memory has been looping through centuries, waiting to be rediscovered. And as we listen, we realize that the clockmaker's shadow stretches far wider than Europe's steeples. It crosses deserts, oceans, and empires. It whispers of a forgotten network of minds who shared not just techniques, but a belief that the world could be measured, understood, and set into motion by human hands. Soon, one particular discovery will bring this mystery into focus, a machine so strange, so advanced, that it will force historians to question everything they thought they knew about invention itself. Beneath the calm waters of the Aegean Sea, sunlight filters through green depths, touching the bones of a shipwreck that has slept for 2,000 years. For centuries, it lay hidden, its cargo reduced to coral and shadow. Then, in 1901, a group of sponge divers searching for treasure stumbled upon fragments of corroded bronze unlike anything they had ever seen. Jagged edges, gear teeth, traces of inscriptions in ancient Greek. It looked like nothing from myth or legend, but something unmistakably mechanical, an artifact that should not exist. When the fragments were brought to the surface, they crumbled in the air. Archaeologists at first dismissed them as the remnants of an astrolabe or clock, but the gears told another story. There were too many of them, layered in precision, cut to tolerances that no known ancient tool could have achieved. The object, encrusted in limestone, hid secrets that would not be fully revealed for another half-century. In the mid-20th century, as technology caught up with curiosity, scientists began to peer inside, using X-rays and advanced imaging. What they found defied belief. Beneath the rusted shell lay a complex arrangement of at least 37 bronze gears, each designed to interlock perfectly. It was a mechanical computer, one capable of predicting the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. It could forecast eclipses, track lunar cycles, and even display the timing of athletic games in ancient Greece. It was, in essence, a device that computed the cosmos, a simulation of the heavens built over 2 millennia before the invention of digital machines. To call it anachronistic feels insufficient. It was as though a fragment of the future had slipped backward in time. The Antikythera mechanism, as it came to be known, shattered the narrative of gradual progress. For decades, scholars believed that precision gearing emerged only in the Renaissance, yet here it was in a shipwreck dating to around 100 BCE, executed with mathematical and mechanical mastery. The implication was impossible to ignore. Ancient minds had once reached a level of technological sophistication equal to, or even surpassing, that of the medieval world. As the scans deepened, more details surfaced, inscriptions that functioned like operating instructions, explaining which dials corresponded to celestial cycles. One panel displayed the Metonic calendar, another the Saros eclipse cycle. The user could turn a simple crank, and the machine would bring the heavens into motion. It was not a relic of superstition but of computation, a mechanical model of knowledge itself. The discovery sent a quiet tremor through history. If such a device existed 2,000 years ago, how many others had been built and lost? Could this technology have survived, hidden in manuscripts, carried through generations of engineers and scholars who kept the memory alive through secrecy? The same geometry that guided the mechanism's gears appears, faintly, in later medieval diagrams, suggesting not coincidence, but inheritance. The sea still guards the rest of the wreck. Many believe additional fragments remain buried in silt, waiting for the right eyes to uncover them. Each new dive promises another revelation, another gear in the machinery of forgotten genius. But perhaps the true mystery lies not in how it was made, but how it vanished. For such a device to disappear entirely from history suggests more than accident, it suggests erasure. Wars, fires, censorship, the fragile arrogance of civilizations assuming themselves original. Progress rises and collapses like tides, and the mechanism is the proof left behind when the water recedes. As the diver's light fades, the last glint of bronze disappears into darkness once more. The ocean closes over the wreck, but the question it raised continues to echo through time. If such precision was possible once, could it have been possible again? Could the minds of the Middle Ages, those same builders of impossible clocks and hidden automata, have inherited or rediscovered the same blueprint, passing it silently through centuries until the memory blurred into myth? The water still whispers its answer, somewhere between the waves. If the Antikythera mechanism was the first whisper of the machine age, then somewhere, centuries later, its echo stirred again. Across the cathedrals and cloisters of medieval Europe, scattered carvings and manuscripts begin to hint at something eerily familiar. Rings within rings, celestial spheres moving in perfect harmony, diagrams that resemble the lost logic of that ancient device. Perhaps the technology was never entirely gone. Perhaps it simply changed its language. In stained glass and illuminated pages, one finds patterns that look like more than art. Angels turn wheels marked with zodiac signs. Saints gesture toward complex ories hidden behind allegory. Some depictions of the cosmos, once thought purely symbolic, match the planetary gear ratios described inside the Antikythera fragments. The resemblance is too precise to dismiss as coincidence. It feels like memory, disguised as devotion. Historians speak of continuity, knowledge preserved through Byzantine scribes, Arabic astronomers, and Renaissance scholars. Yet it may have been subtler than that. A monk copying an ancient manuscript might not have understood the full meaning of its diagrams but felt the rhythm within them, like music written in an unfamiliar key. Over generations, those rhythms reappeared in the architecture of thought itself. Bridges, clocks, and astronomical models carrying the same hidden geometry forward. There are records, faint but persistent, of medieval inventors building planetary machines that mirrored the heavens. They called them orreries, or celestial spheres. Some were made of wood and brass, others of silver and glass, their movements guided by intricate gearing unseen by common eyes. When these devices turned, they recreated the dance of the cosmos, a miniature universe ticking in the palm of human creation. It is tempting to see them as inventions born anew, But perhaps they were rediscoveries, reincarnations of forgotten blueprints, half remembered through drawings, myths, and relics that survived the fall of empires. The human mind, after all, has a strange habit of rebuilding what it once knew, guided not by logic, but by intuition. If the Antikythera mechanism was the prototype, then the medieval orrery was its echo, an unconscious resurrection of ancient brilliance. What had once been built to track eclipses now found new purpose in measuring divine order. Faith became the disguise through which science survived. The same gears that once mapped the heavens for astronomers now turned beneath crosses and frescoes, marking celestial perfection as proof of creation. And yet, in those quiet workshops behind cathedral walls, there must have been a moment, a flicker of realization when an artisan or scholar understood what they were truly recreating. That the movement of these spheres was not merely symbolic, but mechanical, mathematical, and astonishingly precise. But such understanding was dangerous. Knowledge that blurred the line between heaven and human hands was knowledge best kept silent. The sound of turning gears fades again, replaced by a hush heavy with unspoken awe. Somewhere, the ancient blueprint continues its journey through hidden manuscripts and secret mines. The same gears that once turned under the sea now turn in candlelight, centuries apart yet perfectly aligned. And as they move, one truth becomes clear. The Middle Ages may not have invented this technology anew. They may have quietly remembered it. In the dim corridors of medieval monasteries, where silence was worship and obedience a way of life, something extraordinary stirred behind closed doors. Amid the scent of parchment and beeswax, monks and scholars toiled not only over sacred texts, but over gears, levers, and wheels. Machines were born in candlelight, hidden beneath robes of faith, moving with such lifelike grace that even their creators whispered prayers before them. To imitate motion was to imitate creation, and that, in an age ruled by divine authority, was perilous ground. The Church, fearful of hubris, disguised as genius, watched invention with wary eyes. It preached that life, motion, and order were gifts of God alone. Any attempt to replicate them risked trespass into forbidden territory. Yet human curiosity does not kneel easily. In secret, behind sanctuaries and scriptoria, a new kind of devotion unfolded, the pursuit of divine order through mechanism. They called them automata figures, carved from wood and bronze that moved as if possessed by spirit. Some bowed at the hour of prayer, others struck bells or played organs with iron fingers. There were reports of mechanical saints whose lips moved in silent blessing, and angels that beat their wings when the Mass began. To the faithful, these wonders seemed miraculous. To the theologians, unsettling. For every motion implied a hidden force, and if that force was not God, then what was it? Soon, suspicion crept in. The line between miracle and heresy thinned. Inquisitors demanded explanations. Inventors offered none. Some of these machines were dismantled, others quietly disappeared. Their makers retreated into deeper secrecy, disguising their work as clock repair, as ornamentation, as art. But the knowledge endured, passed from hand to hand, whispered across generations. Imagine one of those workshops. A monk alone at midnight, oil lamp trembling. Before him stands a wooden figure of a saint. Beneath its robe, a network of gears and pulleys waits. He turns a small crank, and the figure raises its arm, moving with uncanny grace. The monk exhales, half wonder, half fear. He knows what he has done. He has created movement from stillness, life from material. In another time, it might have been called divinity. Here, it is danger. So the inventions were hidden in plain sight. A clock in a cathedral, its gears sanctified as instruments of prayer. A fountain in a cloister, its motion attributed to gravity and grace. The Church tolerated the result but feared the intent. To understand the laws that governed creation was to risk unmaking its mystery, and mystery, after all, was the foundation of faith. Yet repression cannot stop revelation, it only changes its form. The same fear that silenced the automata would, centuries later, drive invention into secrecy and symbol. The knowledge buried in monasteries would seep into the hands of craftsmen and wanderers, taking on new disguises, new names, until it resurfaced again under another age of light. For now, though, the world above the cloisters remained still. The machines slept in darkness, their creators unspoken, their existence folded into myth. But beneath that silence, the gears continued to turn. The corridors smell of wax and ink. Candles lean low over parchment, their light breathing across lines of Latin text. To the untrained eye, these are pages of devotion, psalms, prayers, meditations on the divine. But hidden between the words, a different language reveals itself. Circles within circles, pulleys drawn beside angels, arms of balance sketched beneath passages about salvation. These were not errors of margin. They were blueprints, machines disguised as scripture. In the monasteries of late medieval Europe, faith and invention shared the same roof but never the same voice. Scholars were bound by obedience, artists by commission. Yet within that restraint, minds continued to wander. Behind the illuminated faces of saints, some manuscripts concealed diagrams of motion, water lifting itself, birds that flapped by winding coils, fountains that flowed without end. To survive, such genius had to hide behind reverence. The same hands that copied the Gospels also drafted the future in miniature. The Codex Madrid, centuries later attributed to Leonardo da Vinci, is not an isolated miracle. Earlier codices, anonymous, unsigned, contain mechanical sketches that echo his later visions almost exactly. Hinged wings, rotating pumps, self-regulating weights, each an idea waiting for permission to exist. The lines curve like prayers but speak of physics. In these quiet sanctuaries, monks became engineers under cover of devotion, transforming curiosity into worship. The symbolism of faith offered a perfect disguise. A lever became the arm of providence. A balance beam symbolized divine justice. The rotation of gears mirrored celestial harmony. No inquisitor could condemn what appeared as allegory. The beauty of the deception was its sincerity. These inventors were not mocking religion, they were expanding it. To them, understanding mechanism was another way to approach the mind of God. Yet the atmosphere was suffocating. Imagine working under vows of silence, your thoughts confined to parchment that could condemn you if misunderstood. The slightest deviation from accepted doctrine could be labeled heresy. And so the inventors encrypted themselves into their art. Marginal doodles of angels turning cranks, saints holding instruments that mirrored real tools. Each was a signature left for those who could read between the lines. In those cloisters, innovation breathed in shallow whispers. You can almost hear it, the scratch of a quill hesitating before a forbidden curve, the heartbeat quickening as a gear's design takes form. Every discovery felt both divine and dangerous. Knowledge lived in exile, hiding behind hymns. As centuries passed, these sketches accumulated, layered through generations of secret thinkers. Their patterns survived, not through open teaching, but through imitation, the next scribe copying both prayer and pattern without knowing their true connection. The result was an underground lineage of design, encoded in devotion, quietly spanning Europe. The manuscripts still exist, scattered across libraries, misfiled under theology instead of mechanics. To study them is to glimpse the claustrophobia of genius caged by faith, and the resilience of creativity that refuses extinction. For every page that survives, countless others were likely burned, dismissed as nonsense, or buried with their makers. But within the flickering candlelight of those monasteries, one could already sense a shift, a slow brightening, like dawn creeping beneath a locked door. The age of secrecy was nearing its end. Soon, the walls of the cloister would open, and ideas once hidden in prayers would emerge into sunlight. What began as coded devotion would become open experimentation, and the minds that once hid in silence would finally speak aloud. Morning breaks across Europe, soft and golden, as if the world itself exhales after a long, silent prayer. The frost of centuries begins to thaw. Libraries once sealed are opened. Traders and scholars carry manuscripts from fallen empires, Greek, Arabic, Persian, Latin, across mountains and seas. The West calls it rebirth, but in truth, it is remembrance. The Renaissance does not invent the light. It rediscovers where it was hidden. Among those who rise to meet this dawn is a man whose sketches will come to symbolize the awakening of genius, Leonardo da Vinci. His notebooks, the Codex Madrid and Codex Atlanticus, overflow with designs, flying machines, perpetual screws, self-moving carts, hydraulic pumps. The world calls him visionary, but many of his visions already existed elsewhere in Arabic treatises, Byzantine scrolls, and forgotten codices from monastic walls. His hand revives an inheritance too ancient to name. Imagine Leonardo studying a newly translated manuscript from Islamic Spain, its ink fading but its geometry intact. The drawings of Al-Jazari of fountains that breathe, of automata that serve drinks, of gears perfectly balanced are there in spirit if not in signature. Leonardo copies, refines, transforms. He is both student and echo, the living conduit through which forgotten brilliance speaks again. The continuum is undeniable. Across the Mediterranean, knowledge flows like returning tidewater, carrying fragments of an older civilization back to shore. In Florence and Venice, workshops hum with experiment. Metalworkers rediscover alloys once common in Damascus. Architects speak of proportion and weight as though rediscovering divine law. Painters map anatomy with the precision of engineers. Every discipline bleeds into another, erasing the boundaries that faith once guarded. The machine, once cloaked in prayer, now stands in the open, shimmering beneath the sun of rediscovery. Yet beneath this radiant surface lies an uncomfortable truth. Many of the Renaissance's new inventions, pumps, escapements, gear trains, even flight prototypes, mirror earlier designs buried in Arabic manuscripts or monastic sketches. The genius of the age is not invention alone, but resurrection. The same ideas re-emerge, clothed in new language, carrying ancient DNA. This does not diminish their creators. It exalts them. It shows that human curiosity never truly dies. It only hides, waiting for safer hands to raise it again. The so-called revolution of the Renaissance is proof not of sudden awakening, but of continuity, a current of thought, flowing silently beneath the noise of empire, ideology, and time. Leonardo's eyes, so often imagined as prophetic, were perhaps looking backward as much as forward. His machines are love letters to an age he could not name, blueprints born from echoes. And as Europe celebrates its newfound reason, a quiet realization begins to surface. Progress may not be discovery, but the remembering of what was once forbidden. The bells of Florence ring. The apprentices open their shutters. The sound of hammers and gears fills the streets where once only prayers were heard. Light floods the workshops like revelation, and the gears begin to turn again not in secrecy, but in triumph. Yet even in this brilliance, shadows remain. Not everyone welcomes the return of forbidden knowledge. Some eyes still watch, fearful of what happens when humanity reaches too far. And for a few, the cost of knowing will soon outweigh the glory of discovery. The light of rediscovery glowed brightly, but in its brilliance lingered the shape of a shadow. For some, that light became too fierce to bear. The same minds that had drawn divine symmetry and mechanical perfection soon found themselves accused of arrogance, of seeking to rival the Creator. The Renaissance opened the door to knowledge, yet it could not silence the echo of fear. Every miracle of motion was still a potential act of defiance. Among the names whispered in this uneasy twilight was Giovanni della Fontana, a Venetian physician and engineer who built machines that breathed smoke and walked by hidden clockwork. His notes described lanterns that projected ghosts across walls, gears that drove masks into laughter, and wooden figures that danced without human touch. He called them inventions. The church called them demons. In the end, Fontana died under suspicion of sorcery. His manuscripts survived only because they were mistaken for allegory diagrams dismissed as metaphor rather than mechanism. Others were less fortunate. Across Europe, experimenters vanished. Alchemists who forged strange alloys were imprisoned or burned. Artisans who harnessed hydraulic power too cleverly found their workshops raided, their tools confiscated. The hunger for knowledge did not fade, it simply learned to hide again. History remembers the names of patrons and painters, but not of the nameless craftsmen whose devices bridged magic and science. They were buried beneath their own blueprints, martyrs to curiosity. Picture a metallurgist in Prague, perfecting a method for tempering steel. His work is unmatched, his instruments precise beyond their century. But when rumors spread that he can melt metal without flame, that he speaks to elemental spirits in the forge, the accusation is enough. His workshop is sealed, his papers burned. The technique dies with him, leaving later centuries to rediscover it at great expense. Such stories are not rare, they are patterns. Knowledge, each time it reaches too far, calls down the same response: control, suspicion, erasure. The Renaissance, for all its light, could not escape the darkness that follows human fear of power. It was not ignorance that destroyed these innovators, it was belief. And yet, there is something hauntingly noble in their disappearance. Some of these inventors, sensing the danger, destroyed their own work. They burned the papers they had filled with dreams. They dismantled their devices piece by piece, leaving only fragments that might one day inspire without condemning. To protect the future, they sacrificed the present. The air in their workshops must have been heavy, the scent of oil and ash mingling with quiet resignation. A quill poised above a page one last time, then snapped in two. The decision to vanish was not made out of weakness, but out of hope that one day, when the world was ready, someone would rebuild what they had lost. Centuries later, their ghosts still linger in the margins. A diagram here, a cryptic note there, hinting at something greater than recorded. They are proof that genius and danger have always shared the same breath. Each lost page reminds us that history's greatest tragedies are not wars, but the moments when knowledge was silenced. As the Renaissance fades into modernity, Europe stands poised on the edge of mechanical awakening. But beneath its triumph, an emptiness hums a gap where names should be, where inventions might have blossomed if not for fear. The machines of tomorrow were already conceived, only to be buried in the ashes of today. And yet, ideas have a strange persistence. They travel when their makers cannot. They cross borders carried by refugees, pilgrims, and wandering minds. Even when silenced in one land, they whisper in another. The gears still turn just elsewhere. In exile, the story of the lost inventors will continue. Across deserts and oceans, their secrets will survive, waiting for the next hands willing to build again. Across the ruins of fallen empires, ideas travel like seeds carried by wind. When armies scatter and libraries burn, knowledge does not die, it flees. It hides in the minds of wanderers, in the satchels of scribes, in the folded corners of manuscripts bound for safer lands. When the world changes hands, invention changes languages. It is migration of another kind, the quiet pilgrimage of thought. From the fading brilliance of Moorish Spain, scholars cross the Mediterranean with books wrapped in cloth, their margins lined with notes on hydraulics and gears. They head east, toward courts that still value such wonders. The water clocks of Cordoba, the astronomical charts of Toledo, the mechanical fountains of Al-Andalus, all find new life in Persia and the Levant. Refugees of learning trade their craft for sanctuary, turning exile into exchange. In Byzantium, scribes preserve Greek mechanics under Christian banners, blending the philosophies of Aristotle with Arabic mathematics. When Constantinople falls, their archives disperse like sparks before a wind, scattering knowledge from the Aegean to the Caspian. Through the vast steppe routes, where caravans stretch like veins of civilization, the fragments of human ingenuity move eastward, rolled in scrolls, hidden among spices, traded for survival. Along the Silk Road, traders who cannot read the languages they carry still bear the future in their packs. A parchment diagram of a balance pump travels beside silks and lapis lazuli. A brass gear becomes a trinket in one city, a revelation in another. Through these exchanges, the logic of mechanism begins to spread not as a single story, but as a mosaic. What Europe calls invention, Asia remembers as translation. In Persia, scholars gather these scattered fragments in observatories and madrasas. They combine Greek geometry, Indian numerals, and Arab astronomy into a harmony of precision. There, water clocks sing again, driven by the same mathematics that once powered the Antikythera mechanism. The knowledge is alive, adapting to each culture's need, wearing new names but keeping the same pulse. Farther east, Chinese inventors fold similar concepts into their own traditions. Astronomers build rotating spheres and mechanical dragons that breathe smoke. The gears that once charted stars in Alexandria now turn beneath lantern light in Kaifeng. Ideas no longer belong to their birthplace, they belong to the road. Every movement of this migration mirrors the human condition itself. Just as families rebuild after conquest, knowledge rebuilds after collapse. It never truly rests. It only changes accent, changing faith when necessary, translating itself to survive. The machines that measure time and motion are not products of nations, but of shared persistence. Every empire that claimed them only borrowed them for a while. Listen closely, and you can almost hear it. The sound of hooves over sand, the jingle of metal parts carried in cloth bags, the murmur of scholars debating in markets beneath desert suns. Ideas moving faster than armies, outlasting kings. The wind carries dust from ruined towers across mountains, and with it, fragments of forgotten genius. When empires fall, ideas hitch rides on the backs of wanderers. They travel in silence, waiting for the next generation to notice them again. The story of invention is not one of creation, but of endurance, of knowledge refusing to die even when its makers are gone. Somewhere along these routes, a few scrolls take an unexpected turn. They will settle in remote monasteries, far from the eyes of power, where monks will copy their diagrams without knowing the worlds they describe. And in those distant archives, the next clues of our forgotten machines will sleep, waiting for rediscovery. Beyond the deserts and trade routes, far from the reach of kings, the trail of invention settles in quiet places. In remote monasteries, mountain libraries, and forgotten temples, the scattered pieces of humanity's genius come to rest. Armenia, Ethiopia, Persia, lands at the edges of empire, become vaults for knowledge that no empire could destroy. In a small monastery tucked into the Armenian highlands, a scribe bends over a parchment older than memory. The ink is faint, the language archaic. Between prayers written in tight, deliberate script, he finds drawings of wheels turned by wind, of wooden frames balanced by weight. He does not understand them, but he copies them faithfully, believing them part of a parable. Centuries later, historians will find those same pages and realize they describe something impossible for the time, a wind-driven chariot, centuries before Europe dreamed of harnessing air for motion. Similar fragments surface in the libraries of Persia. A treatise describes the servant of the breeze, a machine that catches the wind to lift water from deep wells. Its gears are illustrated with care, each tooth carved in proportion. Nearby, another scroll explains how to measure time with falling sand and flowing water, a design identical to the lost devices of Andalusian engineers. The same geometry repeats across continents, proof that the road between minds was shorter than the maps suggest. Even in the highlands of Ethiopia, Parchment scrolls bear inked diagrams of wheels and cranks among hymns. Translators once dismissed them as symbolic, never realizing that beneath the prayers lay real instructions. It is as if each culture, fearing extinction, buried fragments of technology inside its own faith, trusting that sacred words would protect what logic alone could not. In these distant archives, the line between myth and manual blurs. The scholar becomes pilgrim, tracing ideas that speak in languages long dead. Every rediscovered diagram feels like an answered riddle, every translation a resurrection. The machines are not whole. They come as glimpses, a gear here, a mechanism there. But together they form a constellation, a quiet reminder that the edge of civilization was never barren. It was where civilization went to survive. History often tells its story from the center, from capitals, courts, and cities where power shone brightest. Yet it is the peripheries, the silent valleys, the mountain libraries, the desert sanctuaries that guarded the truth of human ingenuity. When the great empires collapsed, these places became islands of continuity, holding the memory of machines that could have changed the world had they not been exiled to obscurity. To read those ancient pages today is to feel time folding back on itself. The wind that turns a monastery's prayer wheel is the same that once powered a forgotten chariot. The pattern carved in an Ethiopian manuscript mirrors the geometry of a Persian pump. Each discovery reveals that history's borders were never truly walls, only pauses between breaths. And somewhere in the dust of these archives, a question begins to stir again. What would happen if these designs were rebuilt? If the wind-driven chariot moved once more, would we finally understand what the ancients knew? That question will lead us into laboratories of the present, where engineers and historians work side by side, reviving the blueprints of the past to see what truly lived inside them. In modern workshops filled with the hum of electric tools and the glow of screens, the ghosts of the past begin to breathe again. Engineers, historians, and archaeologists gather around fragments of ancient design, translating lines drawn by hands that have been dust for 1,000 years. Each reconstruction feels like an act of summoning. What once existed only as faded ink or whispered rumor now takes shape in brass and wood, in the precise ticking of recreated gears. In a university lab, a team rebuilds one of Al-Jazari's water clocks from his 12th century manuscripts. When the final valve is fitted and the water begins to flow, the machine comes alive, not just moving, but thinking in rhythm. As the float rises, it triggers a series of gears that release a tiny bird, striking a cymbal to mark the hour. The sound rings soft but certain, as if a memory has been restored to the world. The scientists watching it are silent, caught between awe and disbelief. How could a man from the Middle Ages calculate hydraulic timing with such perfection? Elsewhere, roboticists study descriptions of mechanical musicians that once played flutes using complex airflow systems. They reconstruct them with modern materials, expecting clumsy imitation. Instead, the sound that emerges is hauntingly fluid, an echo of breath through centuries. Even with advanced modeling, the precision of these mechanisms remains hard to explain. Their logic is simple, yet their harmony defies the tools of their age. Every experiment deepens the mystery rather than dispelling it. In another corner of discovery, metallurgists attempt to recreate alloys described in Persian and Indian treatises. When they heat the metals according to ancient ratios, the result surprises them. Lighter, stronger, more resilient than the expected outcome. Modern instruments confirm what the past already knew. Metallurgy that should not have existed in those centuries somehow did. The revelation is both thrilling and unsettling. There is wonder in these revivals, but also melancholy. For each device reborn, countless others remain unbuildable. Diagrams end midline. Instructions refer to tools we can no longer identify. Some designs seem to rely on principles lost to modern engineering, a missing understanding of flow, force, or proportion. The more we rebuild, the more incomplete our own knowledge feels. We discover not how far we have come, but how much we have forgotten. Watching these reconstructions, one feels a strange intimacy with the ancients. Across centuries, we share the same awe before motion, the same desire to animate the inanimate. It is a dialogue whispered through time, our machines answering theirs. Yet even now, with digital precision and simulation, we cannot fully match the intuition behind their designs. Perhaps they saw mechanics as music, not mathematics. Perhaps they built as poets, not engineers. The question lingers, quiet but persistent. Have we truly surpassed them, or merely learned to copy without understanding? The modern world hums with technology, yet our brilliance feels strangely narrower, our creations faster, but not deeper. The ancients built slowly, deliberately, guided by patience rather than haste. Their machines were not just instruments, they were philosophy made tangible. As another ancient automaton flickers to life under laboratory light, gears turning with perfect grace, the room falls silent again. The scientists watch, not as conquerors of the past, but as its students. For a moment, the centuries collapse into one continuous hum, the same rhythm that has always bound human curiosity to creation. Somewhere, behind that rhythm, the old question stirs once more. What else did they build that we have yet to rediscover? What dreams still sleep beneath the sand, waiting for the right hands to wake them? The ticking continues, the machines move, and the past, it seems, is not done teaching us. There comes a point in every story where the search for lost inventions begins to look less like archaeology and more like introspection. For in the end, the machines we forget are not buried in the earth, they are buried in us. Civilizations, like people, forget what makes them uncomfortable. We do not lose knowledge because it vanishes. We lose it because we turn away. History is filled with these silences. Whole centuries compressed into a paragraph. Entire discoveries dismissed as myth. Yet behind each omission lies a pattern, a quiet, almost psychological defense. Just as the mind protects itself by repressing what is painful, societies do the same. They rewrite their past to maintain coherence, pruning the contradictions that might unseat their certainty. It is easier to believe in steady progress than to confront the possibility that we once fell backward, that brilliance can vanish overnight. The fresco of civilization fades not from neglect alone, but from intent. When power changes hands, so too does memory. New rulers paint over old victories. New religions reshape the past in their own image. The machinery of forgetting becomes part of governance itself, a way to cleanse history of disobedient thoughts. Every empire writes its own light, and every collapse casts new shadows. Anthropologists call it cultural amnesia, but the term feels too gentle. It is not simply forgetting, it is self-preservation. When knowledge threatens to challenge hierarchy or faith, the easiest solution is silence. Manuscripts vanish, not because no one valued them, but because someone valued obedience more. The fragments that remain burned, incomplete, mistranslated, are like dreams recalled at dawn, their clarity dissolving just as understanding begins. In the quiet corridors of museums, you can see the evidence of this forgetting. Inscriptions half erased, reliefs recarved, names chiseled out of stone. Each mark of erasure is a confession. It tells us that the people who came after feared the people who came before. To remember too much would be to question too deeply. And yet, forgetting is never perfect. Beneath every repainted wall, traces of the original mural remain. Beneath every rewritten history, the pulse of what was erased still beats faintly. Humanity may bury its truths, but the soil never quite closes over them. Our myths are the ghosts of facts we once refused to face. The flood, the fall, the forbidden tower, all metaphors for memory corrupted and rebuilt. Perhaps this is why rediscovery feels like déjà vu. Each time we unearth an ancient mechanism or decipher a lost manuscript, something in us stirs with recognition, as if memory itself is waking. We are not discovering for the first time. We are remembering who we were. The sensation is both wonder and grief, a realization that forgetting is not just a loss, but a choice repeated through ages. Civilizations do not die from ignorance. They die from the comfort of certainty, from the illusion that they have reached the summit of understanding. The true danger is not in what we have forgotten, but in what we refuse to remember. As the camera pans across crumbling frescoes and faded manuscripts, the narrator's voice softens. The images blur, colors fading like recollection. The story turns inward, inviting reflection. If history forgets to protect itself, what, then, are we forgetting today to preserve our sense of progress? Every erased line in an old text mirrors a deleted file in a modern cloud. The same impulse to tidy, to control, to simplify persists. The machines we lost may one day return, but the memory of why we let them vanish, that is the harder thing to reclaim. And so, before the search for artifacts continues, we pause here, inside the mind of forgetting itself. The next question is not what we buried, but how. Forgetting has never been random. It has rules, rituals, and tools, an architecture as deliberate as the machines it erases. From the burning of libraries to the quiet corruption of files, every age invents its own methods of deletion. The mechanisms change, but the intent remains, to tidy the past until it fits the present. In Alexandria, scrolls once filled entire wings of marble halls. When the flames came, they rose for weeks, their smoke carrying centuries of thought into the sky. But not every loss is so dramatic. Sometimes it begins with a translation slightly askew, a word softened to suit a new theology, a diagram copied by someone who does not understand its purpose. Each small error compounds until an invention becomes allegory and a manual becomes myth. Later ages perfected the art of disappearance. Conquerors rewrote the languages of the conquered. Reformers dissolved monasteries that guarded inconvenient knowledge. Archivists updated records until their originals were unrecognizable. Even preservation carries danger. What we choose to keep shapes what we forget. History is not a library. It is a sieve. Wars did their part, but so did peace. Neglect is a slower, quieter fire. A manuscript left in damp ruins, an artifact mislabeled, a generation too occupied with its own progress to look backward. What the sword could not destroy, indifference often did. The past fades not because it is fragile, but because we fail to tend it. The modern world believes itself immune to such loss. We hoard data instead of scrolls, trusting that clouds of code will guard our knowledge forever. Yet digital memory is built on sand. A corrupted drive, a forgotten password, a format obsolete by morning, and an archive dissolves as completely as any burned library. The difference is speed. What once took centuries to fade now vanishes in seconds. In this light, forgetting begins to look less like failure and more like function. Every civilization designs a system to manage its own memory. Some call it censorship, others call it progress. Both serve the same end, to preserve the illusion of order by pruning away complexity. The greatest machine of all time may be the one that deletes. And just as the gears of ancient clocks once measured the passage of time, the gears of forgetting measure what we are willing to lose. They turn invisibly beneath politics, religion, and culture, erasing not just objects, but questions. Over generations, the erasures themselves become invisible, leaving only the faintest echo of what once was. The narrator pauses. The screen fades to black for a heartbeat. The sound of static replaces the whisper of pages, a reminder that deletion hums all around us. Every lost file, every burned book, every broken statue is part of the same rhythm, the pulse of civilization editing itself. But sometimes, fragments survive the machine. A gear trapped in stone, a tool mark too deep to erase, a word mistranslated but not destroyed. They wait quietly, like seeds preserved in ash. And when they resurface, they expose the illusion that forgetting is complete. The story now turns toward those survivors, the evidence that memory cannot be fully erased, only hidden. The next step in our journey leads us back to Earth, to the archaeologists and scholars who listen to what the stones themselves still remember. Beneath the dust of centuries, the past begins to murmur again. The archaeologist's brush sweeps lightly over stone, uncovering a groove too precise to be natural. The line curves perfectly, the depth even a mark of motion made by something guided, something engineered. The dirt gives way to a gear imprint pressed into clay, its teeth still sharp after 1,000 rains. The stone remembers what the books forgot. In forgotten workshops, buried under collapsed cities, patterns reappear. A fragment of bronze found in the ruins of Syria bears notches matching medieval escapements. A shattered mold in southern France shows the shape of interlocking cogs. Metallurgists examining ancient slag discover traces of alloys that should not exist for their supposed era strong, light, mixed in ratios that predate recorded metallurgy. Each fragment whispers the same defiance. We were more than we remember. As researchers piece together these remains, they begin to see continuity where history insists there is none. The same geometry carved into Roman mechanisms resurfaces in the frameworks of Gothic cathedrals. The same proportions used by Islamic engineers echo in the bridges of medieval Europe. Knowledge buried under rubble emerges like a ghost wearing different faces. It is not a straight line of progress, but a circle each generation rediscovering what another was forced to bury. Some discoveries arrive by accident. A restorer cleaning the underside of an old cathedral clock finds inscriptions in Arabic script. A fragment of parchment sealed within its casing carries a design identical to those in Al-Jazari's manuscripts. Another excavation in Armenia unearths a carved stone basin whose channels mirror the hydraulic diagrams once thought exclusive to Renaissance Italy. None of these should exist together, yet they do. The puzzle forms itself from pieces scattered across continents. Standing in the silence of these digs, one begins to feel the presence of invisible hands, the lineage of thinkers who built and rebuilt the same ideas across millennia. Their machines may have crumbled, but their intention survived in matter itself. The stones record vibration, the metals remember pressure, even absence carries shape. Every trace is evidence that knowledge leaves physical footprints, no matter how many times it is erased. Under microscopes, the surfaces of ancient tools reveal striations too uniform to have been carved by hand alone. Something turned them, something precise. To the scientist, it is data. To the storyteller, it is vindication. The earth itself has become an archive, keeping score when memory fails. Each dig is not merely an excavation, it is a confession drawn from the ground. When night falls over the excavation site, the artifacts lie arranged in careful lines. Bronze, stone, iron, glass, all silent, all waiting. The light of a lantern catches on a curve, and for a moment it gleams like motion returned. In that glint, one senses a deeper truth, that forgetting is never final, only paused. The past waits patiently, buried not by time but by fear, until curiosity returns to free it. The narrator's voice softens as the camera pans over relics laid out like constellations across a dark table. The stones still remember, he says, almost a whisper. They remember the touch of hands that built before we believed they could. And so, the cycle begins to close. What was buried in silence now rises through evidence. What was erased by ideology now reappears through science. But memory has a cost. For each truth resurrected, another power must yield control. The rediscovery of the erased will soon collide with the will of those who benefit from forgetting. The next chapter will follow that collision, the deliberate war waged not against ignorance, but against invention itself. Knowledge, when it grows too powerful, becomes dangerous not because of what it can do, but because of what it can undo. Every age has known this truth. For those who rule, be they kings, priests, or institutions, information is not freedom, it is risk. And so, throughout history, invention has not simply been forgotten, it has been hunted. After the great medieval workshops fell silent, edicts began to appear, laws that restricted who could build, who could publish, who could even imagine. The guilds that once protected craftsmanship became gatekeepers. Membership required loyalty, not to curiosity, but to hierarchy. A craftsman who experimented outside the guild's approval risked exile or worse. Innovation was no longer a birthright. It was a privilege granted by power. Religious authorities, meanwhile, feared the mechanical imitation of life. Machines that moved on their own blurred the line between divine miracle and human mastery. Some decrees forbade self-moving devices outright, branding them as deceit or sorcery. A clock that ticked too perfectly was not a marvel, it was a temptation. Even scholars who sought natural explanations for celestial phenomena walked a narrow path between curiosity and blasphemy. In royal courts, secrecy became survival. Engineers who designed war machines or mechanical wonders for their patrons were bound by oath never to reveal their methods. Their knowledge belonged to the throne, not to humanity. When dynasties collapsed, their secrets collapsed with them, buried in vaults or sealed behind the same walls that once protected them. Genius became property, and property could be destroyed. There were quieter forms of suppression too. When a new technology threatened the established economy, the response was not fire, but silence. A tool that replaced laborers, a mechanism that rendered a guild obsolete, would vanish without a trace. Its inventor might simply disappear, his workshop seized, his plans deemed unsafe. Some inventions died not in fire, but in silence ordered from above. This war on invention was never declared, but its effects shaped centuries. Progress did not stop because ideas ran dry. It stopped because those ideas were denied permission to live. Fear disguised as morality, politics disguised as piety. Together they drew the boundaries of what humanity was allowed to know. Even now, archives reveal fragments of suppressed designs, water engines classified as threats to mills, optical lenses dismissed as illusions, manuscripts locked away for centuries under the label heretical mechanics. The paradox is cruel. The same powers that claimed to preserve order also ensured that order never evolved. In every age, the guardians of tradition believed they were saving the world from chaos. Perhaps they were. But in saving it, they stifled the heartbeat of progress. The cost was not measured in lives, but in possibilities never born. The narrator pauses. The screen fades to black. Then, softly, what happens to an idea when it cannot be spoken? The answer begins in whispers, in the stories that replace truth when truth is forbidden. As invention was silenced, it found refuge in imagination. Machines that could not exist became myths. The next chapter of our story is written not in schematics, but in legends, tales that remember what history erased. When knowledge is outlawed, it does not die. It changes its name. The forbidden becomes the fantastic. The mechanical becomes the miraculous. What cannot be studied is sung about, and what cannot be built is dreamed. Thus, in the dim centuries that followed the silencing of invention, the lost machines of the past re-emerged as myths, disguised as moral tales. The storytellers took the place of the engineers. In taverns and monasteries alike, voices carried the memory of things too strange to exist. They spoke of mirrors that revealed truth and golems that obeyed commands, of wheels that turned without end, and statues that moved when the moon rose. Each tale came wrapped in warning. Do not build what mocks the divine. Do not summon what you cannot control. Yet hidden beneath the caution was memory echoes of mechanisms too advanced to be superstition. The golem of Prague, molded from clay and brought to life by secret words, may have been more than legend. Some scholars suspect its story began as a reflection of forbidden automata, mechanical figures once built in Jewish workshops, powered by winding springs and clockwork. Over time, myth replaced mechanics. The clay man became a symbol, his creation, a parable about knowledge too dangerous to use. Elsewhere, tales of magic mirrors spread through medieval Europe, discs said to show distant lands or hidden truths. They appear in Persian and Chinese manuscripts as well, sometimes described as polished bronze lenses that could project images. To the fearful, they were sorcery. To modern historians, perhaps the first experiments in optics and reflection. In banning them, society preserved their shadow, instead the myth of seeing too much. Even the dream of perpetual motion, once a legitimate field of experimentation, was recast as folly. Stories of cursed inventors who tried to make machines that ran forever became popular moral lessons. Yet these same legends echo real records of inventors who were punished for claiming they could capture endless energy, a concept the age was not ready to confront. What began as suppression evolved into allegory. The myths scolded what the rulers feared: unregulated creation. Through these legends, the lost technologies survived in code. Every myth carried a faint blueprint, a pattern of gears hidden in metaphor. The myths kept the memory alive long enough for later generations to rediscover it without knowing why the ideas felt familiar. A child hearing the story of a golden automaton might grow up to sketch its image again, unaware that he was echoing a truth older than his culture. In this way, imagination became the archive of the forbidden. The stories preserved what the fires could not. They allowed invention to exist in dream until it was safe to return in metal. Behind every fable lies a silenced truth, and behind every warning lies a map back to curiosity. As centuries passed, these stories layered upon each other until the line between fantasy and history blurred completely. The same cultures that once banned invention began to celebrate it through allegory. The parables they wrote to warn against creation became the inspiration for creators yet to come. What had once been punished as heresy reemerged as wonder. When we look closely at the myths of the Middle Ages, we no longer see fairy tales. We see encrypted memory knowledge hiding in plain sight, speaking in symbols because it was forbidden to speak in facts. The machines became monsters, and the inventors became magicians. Yet the essence remained untouched, the longing to understand, to build, to bring stillness into motion. And so the myths endured until the world was ready to see them again, not as fables, but as fragments of a lost reality. Soon, those fragments would reappear, not in whispers or legends, but in laboratories and workshops, reborn under the banner of invention. Centuries pass, and the myths begin to move again. The machines once whispered of in legend return to the world of matter, though few recognize their faces. What was once called sorcery now wears the name of science. Renaissance workshops hum with rediscovery, Enlightenment laboratories glow with experiment, and the old blueprints stir beneath new ink. Humanity believes it is inventing. In truth, it is remembering. The printing press, hailed as the triumph that gave voice to thought, bears striking resemblance to earlier screw-press mechanisms used for minting coins and pressing olives in medieval workshops. The technology was not born from nothing. It was refined from centuries of hidden craft. The invention that changed civilization had been quietly waiting in the background, disguised as industry until the world was ready to see it as genius. The same pattern repeats across every field. The first European automata of the 15th century metal birds that flapped their wings, figures that poured wine and played instruments, mirror the mechanical marvels of Al-Jazari's court and the temple devices of Alexandria. The Enlightenment's fascination with self-moving figures was a renaissance, not of thought, but of courage. the willingness to rebuild what had long been forbidden. Each new automaton was a confession carved in brass, that the myths of golems and living statues had been blueprints all along. Hydraulic engines, once suppressed by guild decree, re-emerged as tools of empire. Canal systems, fountains, and water-powered mills echoed the same physics described in manuscripts that had crossed the Mediterranean centuries before. What the Church had once labeled heretical suddenly became divine proof of order because now it served the ambitions of kings. Context, not content, determined virtue. In museums today, the parallels are visible to anyone who looks closely. The gear teeth of a Renaissance clock match those of Roman and Arab predecessors with uncanny precision. The levers inside Leonardo's flying machines trace the same geometry found in Persian sketches of wind-driven devices. Even the proportions of his new designs align with those in Byzantine codices that scholars had dismissed as mystical diagrams. It is as if time itself copied its own work. Historians once spoke of progress as an arrow, shooting forward through the ages. But these machines reveal a different image, a circle, perfectly balanced, turning endlessly through rediscovery and loss. Every era believes it has reached the frontier, unaware that it walks paths laid long before. Innovation, it seems, is the act of finding again. Yet there is a kind of poetry in this repetition. Humanity, even when stripped of its memory, continues to rebuild what it loves most. The instinct to make, to animate, to measure, transcends every censorship. Suppression may bury knowledge, but it cannot erase curiosity. The dream of motion is written into our nature, waiting patiently for the right generation to translate it back into form. When the first Enlightenment philosophers wrote about progress, they were unknowingly chronicling a return. Their experiments in mechanics and optics were mirrors held up to forgotten masters. And though they could not see the full reflection, something ancient looked back at them through their own inventions, a quiet smile of recognition across the gulf of time. As the camera lingers on the ticking of a modern clock, its polished gears gleam like fossils of an earlier age. The voice of the narrator lowers to a whisper. They called it invention, he says, but history called it déjà vu. And with that, the circle closes once more. What was hunted becomes celebrated. What was erased becomes evidence. But every rediscovery carries a warning that forgetting always returns, that the next silence may already be forming. The story now turns inward again to the question beneath all others. What do these repeating cycles say about us? The next chapter will search for the answer, deep within the echo between humanity and its machines. Somewhere between invention and prayer lies a mirror. It is not made of glass, but of gears and light. And when we peer into it, we see not our reflection, but our intention. Every machine hums with a question. What are we trying to understand about ourselves? Since the first craftsman carved a wheel or shaped a lever, the urge to imitate life has followed us. The medieval automata, the saints that bowed, the angels that sang, the metal birds that flapped their wings, were not built only for wonder. They were experiments, in essence, attempts to grasp the mystery of creation through motion. When their gears turned, their makers glimpsed something divine, the possibility that life might be understandable, measurable, and perhaps reproducible. Imagine the monk in his cloister, adjusting a spring so that a wooden hand might lift in blessing. He was not trying to deceive the faithful. He was searching for meaning within the stillness of the world. To imitate creation was, paradoxically, to worship it. The closer his mechanism came to life, the closer he felt to the truth behind it. These machines were not toys, they were meditations built of brass and breath. In their turning parts lay the same wonder that drives us now, the longing to make sense of the unseen. The automaton that bowed was not only mimicking prayer, it was prayer, expressed through motion instead of voice. The fountain that flowed without ceasing was a sermon on eternity. The clock that measured the stars was a model of divine order, proof that the universe itself was a mechanism governed by law and balance. Centuries later, our machines are faster, smaller, infinitely more complex, but their spirit remains unchanged. We still build reflections of ourselves. We teach circuits to see, code to think, metal arms to move with grace. The difference is not purpose, but awareness. Where the medieval craftsmen sought to approach the divine, we seek to replicate ourselves. We call it progress, yet perhaps it is only another kind of faith, the belief that understanding leads to mastery, and mastery leads to meaning. Every mechanism carries this dual nature, devotion and desire. To build is to reach outward, but also inward. A simple gear, turning endlessly, reminds us of our own heartbeat. The rhythm of a clock is the rhythm of our mortality made visible. Even now, we are comforted by the pulse of machines, their steady assurance that something, somewhere, continues. But the reflection they offer is not always gentle. When we look too closely, we see our impatience, our hunger, our fear of stillness. We build so that we do not have to face silence. The hum of invention keeps the darker questions at bay. What are we without our creations? If we can build life, what becomes of meaning? The narrator's voice softens, almost a whisper. Every machine, he says, is a reflection not of metal, but of us. The camera lingers on the slow turning of ancient gears beside the sleek movement of robotic joints. Across the centuries, they move in harmony, bound by the same impulse to imitate the invisible. And perhaps that is the true continuity of civilization, not its empires, its wars, or its monuments, but its reflections. Every generation inherits the mirror and reshapes its frame, seeking to see itself more clearly through what it creates. As the scene fades, the hum of machinery blends into the sound of breathing, indistinguishable, inseparable. The story pauses at the threshold between past and present, between faith and function. Because to understand why we build is to begin to understand who we are and who we might yet become. The next step will take us there, to the modern age, where the reflection sharpens and the line between creator and creation begins to blur. The hum of the modern world is the same note, only amplified. What once whispered through the turning of wooden gears now roars through processors and code. We call it progress machines that think, networks that learn, circuits that predict our desires before we name them. Yet when we strip away the wires and glass, the melody is hauntingly familiar. We are still trying to give thought a body, still shaping reflections that answer when spoken to. In laboratories lit by screens instead of candles, engineers train algorithms to recognize faces, emotions, patterns. They speak of artificial intelligence as if it were a newborn species. But beneath the jargon lies the same yearning that drove the monk who built a mechanical saint or the artisan who shaped a singing bird. The difference is scale, not spirit. We are still asking the ancient question, can life be built? Each new device feels like a breakthrough, yet it is also an echo. When robotic limbs mimic the grace of dancers, when neural networks compose music that stirs emotion, we are repeating gestures that began in shadowed workshops centuries ago. The only difference is that now, the reflection looks back at us more clearly. The machines do not merely move, they decide, adapt, respond. For the first time, we glimpse ourselves through creations that seem to dream. It is tempting to believe that this is the summit of invention, that we have finally surpassed the ancients. But perhaps the truth is subtler and stranger. The future we chase may be the past returning. What if the lost technologies we unearthed were not primitive beginnings but early iterations of the same pursuit? The quest to merge thought and motion, to make matter remember. The wheel turns, the pattern repeats, and we arrive at the same threshold with new tools but the same hunger. The narrator speaks softly, almost reverently. We stand in the glow of our own creation, but the light feels old. The camera glides over robotic hands assembling microchips, then over bronze gears preserved in museum glass. The continuity is seamless, the intention identical. In both, there is the human desire to capture time, to extend consciousness beyond flesh. We build because we fear the stillness that waits when the building stops. Yet within this cycle lies both danger and hope. The ancients hid their machines because they feared what imitation of life might invite. We celebrate ours, but perhaps without the caution that once kept balance. To rediscover their restraint could be our greatest advancement. The wisdom we lost may prove more necessary than the knowledge we've gained. If the forgotten inventors of old could see our world, our thinking machines, our synthetic voices, they might recognize themselves not in our brilliance, but in our wonder. They, too, felt the tremor of creation when their automata first moved, the quiet awe of seeing the inanimate awaken. They, too, mistook reflection for revelation. And like us, they faced the question that lingers behind every invention. What happens when the imitation no longer needs its maker? The narrator's tone drifts into stillness. Perhaps progress is not a straight ascent, but a returning tide, he says. Each wave rises higher, but the water is the same. The hum fades, replaced by silence. The sound of the machine paused, waiting. The reflection shimmers between centuries, between hands that built from faith and hands that build from code. For a moment, they seem indistinguishable, and in that recognition lies both comfort and warning. As the chapter closes, the camera pulls back to reveal the same timeless rhythm. Gears turning, circuits blinking, hearts beating, 3 versions of one pulse. The echo of the machine is not in its sound, but in its origin, the human desire to understand by creating. The future, it seems, has always been remembering. In the quiet of a modern workshop, surrounded by computers and humming tools, a different kind of experiment is unfolding. Engineers and historians stand side by side, their hands tracing the same lines drawn by forgotten minds centuries ago. Blueprints copied from fragile manuscripts are spread across metal tables. The smell of oil mixes with the dust of parchment. They are not designing something new, they are resurrecting something impossible. A team in Germany reconstructs a medieval hydraulic clock described in a crumbling codex. The components are shaped with laser precision, but every curve and ratio follows the original hand-drawn notes. When the final weight is attached and the water begins to flow, the machine awakens. The gears turn with uncanny grace. The timing is flawless. Sensors record accuracy within fractions of a second. No one expected perfection. Yet here it is, a design so precise that even modern physics cannot improve it. The room falls silent, the only sound the steady rhythm of water counting the hours. In another laboratory, aeronautical engineers test a reconstruction of a 15th century flying machine. They build it exactly as described. Lightweight frames of wood, cloth stretched into wings, shaped like those of birds. When tested in a wind tunnel, it produces lift values equal to modern gliders. The ancient sketch was not fantasy, it was aerodynamics written in ink before the concept had a name. The inventor had not guessed, he had understood. Elsewhere, roboticists breathe life into automata once dismissed as legend. A brass musician reconstructed from Al-Jazari's designs raises a drumstick and strikes in perfect rhythm. Another figure, powered by water pressure, tilts a cup and refills it with a precision no one thought medieval hydraulics could achieve. Even with computer modeling, researchers cannot fully explain how such synchronization was possible using only mechanical logic. The machines work, but the math does not yet agree. Each test produces the same unsettling wonder. These devices are not crude beginnings of modern science. They are mature solutions born in forgotten contexts. They reveal an understanding of motion, weight, and feedback centuries before formal physics. Every successful reconstruction adds another question to the list. How much have we truly invented? How much have we only recovered? The engineers find themselves caught between exhilaration and disbelief. It is one thing to read about miracles of motion. It is another to stand before one and watch it breathe. The sound of gears moving after 500 years feels almost sacred. One researcher describes it as watching thought become matter again. Another confesses that he no longer knows where the boundary between myth and engineering lies. Documentaries capture these moments in close detail, the reflections of spinning wheels in the researcher's eyes, the tension between awe and humility. These reconstructions are not just feats of craftsmanship, they are dialogues with the dead. Each mechanism that stirs to life feels like a message, carried across time. We were here. We understood more than you think. And as these resurrected machines perform with startling precision, a strange realization emerges. The knowledge that once vanished into silence now hums again, not as nostalgia, but as proof. The impossible was possible all along. We simply stopped believing it. The narrator's voice lowers to a whisper. They didn't just dream of the impossible, he says. They built it. Yet behind every demonstration lies another, quieter question. If they achieved such brilliance, why did their world choose to forget? Why were these minds erased, their inventions buried beneath the comforting myth of gradual progress? The next section turns toward that question, not to rebuild machines, but to understand the cycle that buries them. The machines move again, but their rhythm carries a question. Why must brilliance rise only to be buried? Each reconstruction feels like a resurrection, yet behind the wonder lies an unease. If human hands once reached such precision, what force kept that light from lasting? The scientists who rebuild the impossible begin to see a pattern forming, an invisible pulse that governs invention and erasure alike. Innovation, it seems, does not move in a straight line. It breathes. It expands until the world trembles at its edges, then collapses under its own revelation. Empires rise with invention and fall beneath the weight of their discoveries. The more we learn, the more fragile our certainties become. And so each age resets itself, smoothing the rough edges of genius, silencing the questions that threaten its comfort. History does not progress, it circulates. The gears of civilization turn like the machines they produce, always forward, yet always back to where they began. The narrator's tone softens as images of reconstructed automata blend with footage of modern laboratories. Every epoch believes it stands at the summit of understanding, he says, yet every summit eventually becomes a ruin. In one century, knowledge is sacred. In the next, it is sacrilege. The pendulum of memory swings endlessly between illumination and amnesia. Historians in the film call it the cycle of knowing. It begins with curiosity, an open hand reaching toward the unknown. Then comes mastery, when ideas become instruments and discovery feels divine. But mastery gives way to fear, fear of consequence, fear of loss of control. And so, humanity turns away, dismantling what it has built, convincing itself that the age of wonder has passed. Only later, when curiosity stirs again, does the hand reach out once more. By then, the old blueprints have become myth, and the rediscovery begins. The camera drifts through time-lapse imagery, clock gears turning, storm clouds swirling, waves folding over themselves, visual metaphors for a pattern too vast to deny. History moves in circles, not lines, the narrator continues. Its motion is mechanical, its pause is human. The cycle is not tragedy, it is design. Perhaps forgetting is necessary, a kind of sleep between awakenings. Even the modern age follows this rhythm. We race toward artificial intelligence and quantum mastery as if into new territory. Yet our questions echo those of the first inventors. What does it mean to build something that might outlive us? What do we become when our creations begin to think? We are still trapped inside the same clock, turning the same gears, convinced each rotation is progress. The scientists who revived the ancient machines begin to see themselves reflected in their work. They are the next custodians of the same cycle, the rediscoverers who will one day be forgotten. Their breakthroughs will fade into textbooks, then into myth, until another generation digs them up again, astonished that their ancestors once knew so much. The thought is both humbling and liberating. Perhaps knowledge is not meant to accumulate endlessly, but to renew itself, reborn in every age that remembers to ask. Like the oscillation of a pendulum, progress is rhythm, not direction. Its pauses give meaning to its movement. The silence between inventions is as essential as the inventions themselves. As the reconstructed machines tick softly in the final montage, their shadows overlap like interlocking wheels. The narrator speaks over the sound, his voice low, reflective. We call it progress, yet every turn is a return. The past does not rest behind us, it waits ahead, patient, eternal, ready to be rediscovered. The gears slow, their motion fading into darkness. The screen still hums faintly, as if something unseen continues to turn beyond sight. The audience is left suspended in that stillness, the breath between cycles, between what has been remembered and what will be lost again. The next chapter will open in that breath, carrying us toward the final revelation. What remains when the machine of history stops, even for a moment, and humanity hears its own reflection? The story circles back to where it began, beneath the turning gears, among the faint echoes of forgotten minds. Across centuries of silence and rediscovery, one truth endures: humanity has never stopped reaching for the same light. From the engineers of Alexandria to the monks of Europe, from the artisans of Persia to the scientists of today, the desire to understand creation has always been our most persistent invention. The machines may have changed, but the hands that built them, the wonder that drove them, remain the same. The narrator's voice is calm now, reverent, almost a prayer. He reminds us that every age believed itself unique, yet all have shared the same impulse to mirror the universe, to make order visible, to transform curiosity into motion. The Antikythera mechanism, Al-Jazari's automata, Leonardo's sketches, the modern robots, all pieces of the same mosaic, fragments of one continuous experiment, humanity studying itself through creation. Images flow across the screen like a dream, bronze gears turning into silicon circuits, candlelight blending into digital glow. The transitions are seamless, time dissolving. The medieval fountains become laboratory pumps. The old orreries align with the satellites orbiting above. The message is not that we have advanced, but that we have remembered. The patterns we call progress are repetitions of truths too essential to vanish. What if progress isn't discovery? The narrator asks softly, but remembering who we once were. The question lingers in the air, trembling like a note sustained too long. The viewer can feel the weight of it not as nostalgia, but as recognition. Each rediscovered idea, each machine reborn from dust, is a mirror held up to our collective memory. We are not evolving away from the past. We are returning to it with clearer eyes. The camera glides over reconstructed automata, their movements slow and deliberate. The mechanical hand raises, the wheel turns, the pendulum swings. Each motion feels alive, yet older than life itself. The same geometry that governed these machines governs the orbits of planets and the rhythm of our own hearts. In this moment, invention and existence become indistinguishable. Civilization, the narrator suggests, may not be a ladder climbing toward perfection, but a spiral that circles ever closer to understanding. The losses, the silences, the erasures, they are pauses, not endings. Each forgetting is only an interval in a longer song. The melody of human genius continues, sometimes buried, sometimes breaking the surface like light through water. We begin to see that every rediscovery, every gear found in clay, every text rescued from oblivion is more than a historical event. It is a return of memory. The machines of the past remind us that we have always been capable of more than we believed. They are proof that brilliance is not linear, but innate. The same imagination that turned sand into glass and stars into equations still turns within us. As the images fade, the narrator's voice grows quiet. Perhaps we never lost the knowledge, he says, only the faith to see it. The gears slow, their rhythm becoming a heartbeat, and for a moment, time itself feels still. The audience is left suspended between awe and melancholy, sensing that what we call progress is simply our oldest memory awakening again. The frame darkens to a faint glimmer of light, a single, slow-turning cog, its shadow cast across the ages. The next words fall almost as a whisper. And if all that has been built was once remembered, then what will we one day recall about ourselves? The reflection deepens, carrying us gently toward the final meditation. The realization that our own age, so certain of its permanence, may be just another verse in the same endless refrain. Night settles over the screen. The sound of wind replaces music. The final chapter begins, not with revelation, but with silence, the kind that asks us to listen rather than to learn. The narrator's voice returns, gentle as breath. Every age believes it will be remembered, he says, but memory, like any machine, must be maintained. The image is slow. The camera drifts through the remnants of workshops and libraries, the same shelves we have walked through all along, now covered again in dust. Candles burn low beside glass screens displaying streams of binary code. In their reflection, we see not monks or engineers, but ourselves. The digital age, for all its brilliance, is as fragile as parchment. We hoard knowledge in invisible clouds, trusting that electricity will preserve what ink once did. Yet the servers hum no more securely than the scrolls once rested. Both depend on faith, the faith that someone will remember to keep the power on. The narrator compares the flicker of a screen to the flutter of candlelight. Both are temporary. Both promise eternity while lasting only as long as the hand that tends them. The medieval world, he whispers, believed its cathedrals would stand forever. Ours believes the same of its data. The thought lingers like an echo, an admission that even now, we may be building monuments already marked for forgetting. The scene shifts. Ancient gears turn slowly underwater, caught in the light of a diver's lamp. Each rotation is slow, deliberate, eternal. Some things, the narrator continues, were built not to endure time, but to teach us how to endure it. The camera lingers on the gears until they fade into the wheels of a modern clock, then into a spinning hard drive, then into the pupil of an eye. The same motion, the same memory, endlessly reborn. He speaks again, almost to himself. Perhaps history's greatest technology isn't the wheel, or the engine, or the algorithm, it is memory. The only invention that can turn loss into continuity. The words settle like dust in the air. Without it, every civilization begins again from silence. A long pause. The ticking returns the same sound that opened the story in Chapter 1. It echoes faintly now, neither mechanical nor human, but something in between. The screen fills with fragments from earlier scenes. The automata, the manuscripts, the clock towers, the bronze fragments from the sea, all of them turning together, illuminated by a single beam of light, as if history itself were a single machine, endlessly rewinding and restarting. The narrator's voice lowers to a whisper. The last machine we must preserve, he says, is memory. And then, more quietly still, if we forget again, the world will not end, but it will begin once more, unaware that it has already been here before. The gears slow, the sound fades, and the frame darkens until only one point of light remains, a candle, flickering against the void. The wick burns out. Darkness. Then, faintly, a tick. Another. The rhythm begins again, steady and eternal. The story closes as it began, with the sound of unseen gears, turning somewhere just beyond the edge of time. The circle is complete. The memory continues.